So, guys, I want to talk about the South Park episode Fingerbang, and definitely this is one of my favorite episodes of South Park. So, definitely, this episode was kind of really inspired about what was happening in like the late '90s. I think this episode was like the 2000s, where people who were younger always had that like fantasy of getting into boy bands or other things like that. Really, So, definitely this episode kind of really follows, like how children have that dream of being in a boy band and how like people who are actually in boy bands and how it really turns out really. So what happens is that Cartman has a dream of starting a boy band and things are going very, very well with that. And what happens is he wakes up and he kind of gets Stan and Kenny and Kyle in it and stuff like that. So, they also kind of said something like, what, four-man band, we need one more person or else it's going to suck, really. So they bring in Wendy. So there's also another thing that you kind of see with Cartman's character. He doesn't want to work with Wendy for two reasons. That, number one, she doesn't have big breasts. And that kind of alludes to, like, how in a lot of the music business, they care about sex appeal, sometimes sex appeal of women or female children, children that are teens. They still want teens to be sexy. So there is a sense of, pedoeroticism. And you kind of got that from Michael Jackson. Like when he was a kid, I think there was like some song lyrics he was saying, like, I want to get it down. I want you to get on your knees, girl, and other things like that. He's a kid saying that. We understand the sexual innuendo. That's give me a blowjob reference type of thing. And then there's also like, what you see with stars like Hannah Montana and Christina Aguilera or Britney Spears. Like I think Britney Spears was like doing schoolgirl, that schoolgirl outfit thing, like Hit Me Baby One More Time. And I think she was young when she did that song, So there's always that thing about pedoeroticism, and then there's also the thing about sexual discrimination that Cartman wants a boy band. So if you have a very talented female, and even if it works very well, sometimes you run into that situation where the producer's like, no, it has to be five boys. The reason why you can't do it is because you're a girl. So definitely, that's not good. Or sometimes what happens, like especially in Korea, that there's a lot of like boy bands and girl bands. There's not really like a mix, So if so like definitely the industry is really about like wanting what they want as far as appeal, and sometimes it's you're only gonna be it's only gonna be five boys working together, not a mix or whatever, so that happens. And then what happens a little bit later in the episode is that Cartman's mom comes up with Cartman asks his mom to come up with costumes for them. So there's a bunch of arguing, and that also happens with a lot of movie set. That happens with a lot of like in film, and also with music videos and working with people, is that there's always a lot of arguing and whatever. So Cartman has to deal with that, and then also another thing that Cartman has to deal with is trying to make his band a little bit more popular. So he kind of like talks to Chef about some advice, and they make a music video. And what happens in the music video is a few things. That first of all, Cartman has all the girls kind of like screaming stuff like that. Like they all have a crush on Matt Lauer. He said, think of Matt Lauer, and they all kind of freak out really. So he gets that advice from Chef, and what Chef's trying to say is that when it comes to music videos and things like that, it's all like fake, and it's all kind of psychological. So if you have a bunch of girls screaming and cheering, that's why you see that in a lot of music videos, is because the recording companies know that that's what works really. Like look at Motown Records or other studios. They have a certain formula on how they put out something. So there is a lot of like fakeness and all of that, So I'm saying being fake is not a good quality. And then the next thing about that is that Timmy is actually the person recording it, and Timmy does a shitty job with his camera angles. And I think that kind of alludes to how, like as I said, I've done filmmaking, that obviously when you get people together to make a music video, or you get people together to make a film, it's very, very hard to do, because most of the time you're not going to find reliable people, and it's so frustrating because it's like you're passionate And sometimes what happens is like with Edison, that you may have to do 1,000 videos before you have that one good one. Because when you work with people, you have to deal with people's strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes what happens, especially with filmmaking and being a musician, is that there's a lot of expensive lessons. Like I remember, like, how, I made like 14, I made like 20 short films in my life. And I remember, like, how, one film was like, close to $1,000. And it was because the main actor, flaked, and a couple of other issues. Another film that I did, I had a director who had was making a lot of idiotic choices, like saying that I wrote 2 4-page scripts and we're gonna film it all in like 2 hours for each script. When actually you take a 4-page script and you should film in a weekend, 3 or 4 days, not just kind of do cram sessions and all that. Really, like I learned to work with more experienced people and more people who are serious about filmmaking, not work with somebody who is not experienced. So Carbon has to learn the same lessons of, what he actually has to fail a bunch of times in order to be successful. And that's why a lot of people don't become like musicians or celebrities or other things like that, because they have to go through those 10,000 failures. And that's definitely very heart-wrenching and hard. So Carbon's going through that frustration. And then also, too, like him performing the mall, that's another great example of, he's passionate and he really, really cares, but, the mall cops don't care. So there's always just like kind of like barriers. And I think in the end of the episode, he's kind of like motivated to have fun and really enjoy himself. And that's kind of like the thing with being a musician or an entertainer. It doesn't really matter what you do. You gotta just like what you're doing. Because more than likely you're gonna have that path instead of like the path of an artist. Like my dad said, like, there's 10 million Michael Jacksons, but there's only one Michael Jackson you know about. So that's definitely true. And then the other thing I would kind of say is that that's also true. Like, like look at me, like I'm really into filmmaking, but I like my YouTube videos, I like my travel videos, and I'm very kind of happy with how I do things. There's things that I will improve upon, but sometimes, like in the ending, you saw them all having fun and having a great time, really. So it kind of says like you need to almost like be happy with that happiness, because most of the time you're not going to end up in Hollywood and having that dream life, really. And that's kind of like the first part of all this. The second part is Randy Marsh, that he doesn't want Stan to be in the band, because what happened was Randy was a musician and he kind of lived the musician lifestyle. So he had a bunch of, so he was in a choir that was going nowhere. He was picked up by somebody. He blew off everybody because he let fame get to his head, when you should be respectful and caring about other people. And then what happens is that he made a lot of money, he had a lot of women, and he kind of thought that would last forever. And that happens with a lot of musicians, that they get comfortable in that lifestyle. They don't like watch their resources and whatever, really. So when it's over, really. And then when he came back to South Park, he had a very severe depression and he was treated like a joke, really. So he doesn't want that for his son. So there's also a side of that some of the message that I think Randy has to learn is that it's not really about saying that being a musician is about other people building you up and tearing you down. It's about you adapting to all the politics and like in being a musician, and not learning from veterans from the industry. Definitely if you're recognized and you are becoming a celebrity and you're getting those checks, you should definitely like learn how to save money. You should definitely also not let that get to your head, and you shouldn't give up old friendships. You have to be like, okay, well, I'm not available, but I'm not bigger. I'm not so big that I think that you're irrelevant to me. So I think that that's always very, very important. And you take it from there, really, So definitely this episode has a lot to say about people who have become musicians. And then there's also a lot to say about how fake the music industry is, but also the other thing is what impact it has on people. But in the end of the day, you should just like what you're doing and be cool with that. And then the last thing I want to talk about, why is it named Fingerbang? And I think that it's kind of important because as I said, you kind of look at what Cartman said about Wendy, like not having big enough hooters, and then Wendy kind of being a little like not like kind of like seeing it as a sexist thing. She kind of just doesn't. She kind of just is upset that she doesn't have big hooters. And later on, you kind of realize, in a few other seasons, you realize that Wendy's confident. Wendy is self conscious about her body. So I do think that that goes over her head. And the whole finger bang thing is that that's the whole point. It's a sexual innuendo, and definitely Cartman doesn't understand what that means. Kenny does, but Kenny may more see it as a comical thing. So it is kind of like how I think that most boy bands and girl bands are really there to promote entertainment, but most importantly to approach sexuality. And a lot of people don't see that when they start. Like obviously, like in sync, even though like all the girls are screaming for them, it's all the girls. It's all the teenage girls and all the adult women screaming at them because they're all fantasizing, to have sex with them, even if they were teens at the time, or even if you look like the Jonas Brothers, like why do you think that there is adult, or Justin Bieber, why do you think that there was that, well, why there is a bunch of women screaming at all ages, because even the adults are probably thinking about humping their brains out. Or same thing with same thing with a lot of like girl bands or female celebrities who became popular at younger ages. Like I think a great example is you look at Brooke Shields. She was not a musician, but obviously she was not even that good of an actress. But one thing that sold her was that she was very sexualized at a young age. The movie Pretty Baby. She appeared in Playboy and lingerie as a teenager. Blue Lagoon. She was underage, but she had to perform a lot of scenes naked in that film, and all other things like that. So I think the finger bang reference is how we still live in a society where boy bands and girl bands and other like entertainers and whatever, they're all promoted to like kind of sell sex in a different way or not. And it doesn't matter what age, it's always sex sells. Even if the ethics are very corrupt in the music business.